The fork clattered against the expensive china plate, the sound echoing through the quiet restaurant like a gunshot. Richard Sterling sat frozen in his leather chair, his heart hammering against his ribs as he stared across the dimly lit dining room. There, serving tables in a simple black uniform, was the woman who had walked out of his life 5 years ago. Jasmine. His ex-wife. The woman he thought he'd never see again. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. That wasn't what made his hands shake as he reached for his water glass with trembling fingers. It was the 3 small children sitting at a corner table near the kitchen. 3 identical faces. 3 pairs of eyes that looked exactly like his own. 3 children who couldn't be more than 4 years old, quietly coloring on paper placemats while their mother worked. Triplets. And they looked just like him. Mr. Sterling? Are you all right? His business partner's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. You look like you've seen a ghost. Richard couldn't answer. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could do was stare at those 3 little faces, seeing his own features reflected back at him in miniature. The same dark hair that fell across their foreheads. The same stubborn chin. The same way the smallest one bit his lip when he concentrated on his coloring, exactly the way Richard did when he was thinking hard about a problem. How was this possible? When had Jasmine been pregnant? Why hadn't she told him? The questions crashed through his mind like ocean waves, each one more overwhelming than the last. He watched as Jasmine moved gracefully between tables, her natural beauty unchanged despite the tired lines around her eyes. She looked older, more serious, but still breathtakingly beautiful. Her dark skin glowed under the restaurant's warm lighting, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun that showed off her elegant neck. She hadn't seen him yet. She was focused on her work, taking orders and serving food with the kind of professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But then, as if she could feel his stare burning into her, she turned. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. The color drained from her face. The notepad slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. For a moment they just stared at each other, the years falling away like autumn leaves. Then Jasmine's gaze shifted to his table, to his expensive suit, to the business papers spread in front of him, and something hardened in her expression. She bent down to pick up her notepad, her movements sharp and angry. When she straightened up, the professional mask was back in place, but Richard could see the storm brewing in her dark eyes. One of the triplets, a little girl with pigtails, looked up from her coloring and said something to her brothers. All 3 of them turned to look at Richard, their young faces curious and innocent. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Anyone who saw them together would know immediately that these were his children. His children. The words echoed in his mind like a bell tolling. He had children. 3 of them. And he had never known they existed. I need to go, Richard said suddenly, standing up so fast that his chair scraped against the floor. His business partner looked confused, but Richard wasn't paying attention anymore. He was already moving across the restaurant, weaving between tables like a man possessed. Jasmine saw him coming. She said something quick to another waitress and then walked briskly toward the back of the restaurant. But Richard was faster. He caught up to her near the service station, where she was pretending to organize menus. Jasmine. Her name came out like a prayer, like a plea. She didn't look at him. You need to leave. Are they mine? The question burst out of him before he could stop it. Her hands stilled on the menus. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she finally turned to face him, and the pain in her eyes nearly knocked him over. You lost the right to ask that question 5 years ago, she said quietly. But she didn't deny it. And in that silence Richard found his answer. The triplets were his. He was a father. And he had missed everything: their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. 5 years of their lives gone forever. The weight of it crashed down on him like a building collapsing. He had to grip the edge of the service station to stay upright. All those years, while he had been building his fortune and expanding his business empire, his children had been growing up without him. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was barely a whisper. Jasmine's laugh was bitter. I tried. Do you remember Susan, your assistant? She made it very clear that you didn't want to be bothered with personal matters. Especially not from your ex-wife. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Susan, his former assistant, had been fiercely protective of his time. She had screened all his calls, filtered all his emails. Had she really blocked Jasmine from reaching him? Had she kept this from him? I didn't know, he said desperately. I swear to you, Jasmine, I didn't know. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because some of the hardness left her expression. It doesn't matter now, she said finally. They're fine. We're fine. We don't need anything from you. But even as she said it, Richard could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her uniform was slightly wrinkled, the small scuff marks on her shoes. She was working as a waitress in a restaurant when she should have been living comfortably as his ex-wife. The divorce settlement had been generous, but clearly it hadn't lasted. "Let me meet them," he said. "Please." "Absolutely not." Her voice was sharp with panic. "You can't just walk back into our lives after 5 years and expect. They're my children too." The words came out harder than he intended, but he couldn't help it. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a fierce protective instinct he didn't even know he possessed. "I have a right to know them." "You have no rights here," Jasmine shot back. "You gave those up when you chose your precious company over your marriage." The accusation hit its mark. Richard flinched, remembering all the late nights at the office, all the missed dinners, all the times he had chosen work over his wife. But this was different. This was about children he had never even known existed. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "But I can't change the past. All I can do is try to make things right now." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Jasmine's voice was full of hurt and anger. "Are you going to disappear again when things get difficult? Are you going to decide that being a father is too much work?" The questions cut deep because he knew he deserved them. But as he looked past her to where the triplets sat coloring, oblivious to the drama unfolding nearby, he felt something shift inside him. Something fundamental and unshakable. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." Jasmine stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her internal struggle playing out across her face. Finally, she glanced at her watch and sighed. "My shift ends in 20 minutes, she said reluctantly. "If you want to meet them, you can wait in the parking lot. But I'm warning you, Richard, if you hurt them, if you disappoint them, I will never forgive you." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As Jasmine walked away to finish her shift, Richard made his way back to his table on unsteady legs. His business partner was looking at him with concern, but Richard couldn't focus on anything except the 3 small faces across the restaurant. His children. The words still felt surreal, like something from a dream. But as he watched them giggle over their coloring books, as he saw the way the little girl helped her smaller brother reach his crayons, as he noticed how the oldest boy kept glancing toward their mother to make sure she was okay, he felt something he had never experienced before. Pure, overwhelming love. An absolute terror. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he let them down the way he had let down their mother? What if he was too late to be the father they deserved? The questions swirled in his mind as he waited, his expensive business dinner forgotten. Nothing mattered now except the family he had never known he had. The family he was determined not to lose again. 23 minutes later, Richard stood in the restaurant parking lot, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets to hide their trembling. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. He had sent his business partner away with a hurried excuse about a family emergency which wasn't exactly a lie. The back door of the restaurant opened and Jasmine emerged, followed by the 3 children. In the parking lot's harsh fluorescent lighting, the resemblance between Richard and the triplets was even more striking. They were beautiful children, healthy and bright-eyed, despite the simple clothes they wore. "Mommy, who's that man?" the little girl asked, pointing directly at Richard. Jasmine's jaw tightened. "Emma, don't point." She looked at Richard with a mixture of resignation and defiance. This is Richard. He's an old friend of Mommy's." The oldest boy, who Richard guessed must be Ethan, studied him with serious eyes. "He looks like us." Kids noticed everything. Richard's heart squeezed in his chest as he took a tentative step forward. "Hi," he said softly, crouching down to their eye level. "I'm very happy to meet you." The smallest boy, Eli, hid behind his mother's legs, but Emma stepped forward boldly. "Are you really tall?" she asked with the blunt curiosity of a 4-year-old. Richard smiled despite himself. "I guess I am pretty tall." "I'm gonna be tall too," Emma announced. "Mommy says I'm growing like a weed." "Emma gets in trouble at school for being too loud," Ethan informed him solemnly. "But she's good at sharing her crackers." "Ethan," Emma protested, her cheeks flushing. "You're not supposed to tell people I get in trouble." Watching them interact, Richard felt his chest tighten with emotion. They were so innocent, so unaware of the complicated adult world swirling around them. They didn't know that their entire lives were about to change. "We should go," Jasmine said abruptly. "It's past their bedtime." "Please," Richard said, standing up. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" Jasmine looked at the children, then back at him. "Kids, go sit in the car. I'll be right there." But Mommy Eli started to protest. Now, Jasmine said firmly, handing Emma the car keys. Emma, you're in charge. Keep the doors locked until I get there. The children reluctantly walked to an older sedan parked nearby. Richard watched them go, noting the way the car's paint was faded and how Emma had to help Eli with his seatbelt. Everything about their situation told a story of financial struggle. How long have you been working here? He asked once the children were out of earshot. 2 years, Jasmine replied curtly. Before that, I worked at a diner across town. Before that, I cleaned offices at night while they were at daycare. Each word was like a punch to his gut. Jasmine, the divorce settlement. Lasted about a year, she cut him off. Raising triplets is expensive, Richard. Especially when one of them needs speech therapy and another has asthma. Medical bills add up fast. Richard felt sick. While he had been living in his penthouse apartment, dining at 5-star restaurants and flying first class around the world, his children had been struggling. His ex-wife had been working multiple jobs just to keep them fed and housed. Why didn't you come to me? He asked desperately. Why didn't you tell me you needed help? Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. I tried. I called your office 6 times when I first found out I was pregnant. Your assistant told me you were too busy for personal calls. I sent emails that got no response. I even showed up at your building once, but security wouldn't let me up. The blood drained from Richard's face. Susan did that? Don't act surprised, Jasmine said bitterly. You trained her well. Keep Richard Sterling focused on business. Don't let anything personal interfere with his precious empire. Richard remembered Susan's efficiency, the way she had protected his time so ruthlessly. He had thought it was helpful. He had never imagined she would keep something this important from him. I fired her 3 years ago, he said quietly. She was embezzling money from the company. Jasmine's expression flickered with surprise, but she quickly masked it. Well, the damage was already done by then. I would have wanted to know, Richard insisted. About the pregnancy, about the children, I would have wanted to be involved. Would you? Jasmine challenged. Really? Because I remember a man who worked 16-hour days and couldn't even remember our anniversary. I remember a man who missed our last 3 wedding anniversaries because of business trips. What makes you think you would have been any different with children? The accusations stung because they were true. Richard had been completely consumed by building his company. He had treated his marriage like another item on his to-do list, something to be managed rather than cherished. I was different then, he said. I was young and stupid and I thought success meant money and power. I thought I had all the time in the world to focus on personal things later. And now? Jasmine's voice was skeptical. Now I know that I lost the most important thing in my life because I was too blind to see what really mattered. He looked toward the car where his children were waiting. I can't get back the time I missed with you. But maybe I can still be a father to them. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the harsh parking lot lighting. They ask about their father sometimes, she admitted finally. Emma especially. She sees other kids with their dads and she wants to know why she doesn't have one. What do you tell her? That some families are different. That not all children have fathers in their lives. Jasmine's voice was soft with old pain. But it's getting harder to explain as they get older. Richard's heart broke a little more. I want to be in their lives, Jasmine. I want to be their father. It's not that simple, she said, shaking her head. You can't just decide to be a parent when it's convenient for you. These children have routines, needs, feelings. They don't know you. To them, you're just a stranger who looks like them. Then let me change that, Richard pleaded. Let me get to know them. Let me prove that I'm not the same selfish man I was 5 years ago. Jasmine glanced at the car again, where the children were growing restless. Emma was making faces at her brothers, trying to make them laugh. I don't know, she said finally. I need time to think about this. They're my whole world, Richard. I've spent 5 years protecting them, providing for them, being everything they need. I can't just let someone waltz in and disrupt their lives. I understand, Richard said, though every fiber of his being wanted to argue. But please don't shut me out completely. These children are mine too. I have a right to know them and they have a right to know their father. Rights? Jasmine repeated, her voice hard again. You want to talk about rights? Do you know that Eli still asks why we don't have a nice house like his friend Tommy? Do you know that Ethan got made fun of at school because his shoes have holes in them? Do you know that Emma cried for an hour last month because she couldn't go to her friend's birthday party at that expensive indoor playground? Each revelation was like a knife to Richard's chest. His children had been suffering while he lived in luxury. They had been going without while he spent more on a single business lunch than they probably saw in a month. "Let me help," he said desperately. "Please. I have money." "I don't want your money," Jasmine snapped. "I want what's best for my children. And I'm not sure that's you." The words hit him like a physical blow, but he couldn't argue with them. What had he ever done to prove that he would be a good father? What evidence did she have that he wouldn't just disappear again when things got difficult? "Give me a chance," he said quietly. "That's all I'm asking for. One chance to show you that I've changed. That I can be the father they deserve." Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, then at the car where the children were waiting. Finally she pulled out her phone. "This is my number," she said, typing quickly. "I'll text you my address. You can come by on Saturday afternoon. For 1 hour. And if you're even 5 minutes late, if you cancel, if you do anything to upset them, that's it. You're done." Richard's phone buzzed with her message. He looked down at the address, a modest apartment complex across town, far from the wealthy neighborhood where they had once lived together. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet," Jasmine replied. "This isn't about you, Richard. This is about them. They deserve to know who their father is, even if he's not the father they deserve to have." With that parting shot, she walked to the car and got in. Richard watched as she drove away, his 3 children's faces pressed against the back window, looking at him with curious eyes. He stood in the empty parking lot for a long time after they were gone, his mind reeling with everything that had just happened. In the span of an hour, his entire world had shifted. He was a father. He had 3 children who didn't know him, who had been struggling while he lived in ignorance. But more than that, he still loved Jasmine. Seeing her again, talking to her, being in her presence had awakened feelings he thought he had buried years ago. She was different now, harder, more guarded, scarred by years of struggle, but she was still the woman he had fallen in love with. Still the woman he had been too stupid to fight for. As he walked to his car, Richard made a silent promise. He was going to win back his family. Not just his children, but Jasmine too. He was going to prove that he had changed, that he could be the man they needed him to be. He just hoped it wasn't too late. Saturday afternoon arrived with an unseasonably warm October sun that made the leaves on the trees glow like stained glass. Richard had spent the week in a state of nervous energy, unable to concentrate on work, unable to sleep properly. He had researched everything he could about 4-year-olds, bought age-appropriate gifts, and changed his outfit 3 times before settling on jeans and a casual button-down shirt. Now, standing outside the modest apartment complex where his children lived, he felt more nervous than he had before any business presentation. His hands were sweating as he checked the address one more time and climbed the stairs to apartment 2B. The building was clean but obviously older, with worn carpeting in the hallways and paint that had seen better days. Richard tried not to think about his penthouse with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. This was where his children lived. This was their world. He knocked softly on the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's him." Emma's voice rang out from inside. "Mommy, the tall man is here." Richard heard footsteps, then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened and Jasmine appeared, looking tired but beautiful in jeans and a simple sweater. Behind her, 3 curious faces peered around her legs. "You're on time," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I've been sitting in my car for 20 minutes, Richard admitted. "I didn't want to be late." Something flickered in Jasmine's expression, maybe approval, maybe just surprise. She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small but immaculately clean. The furniture was second-hand but well-maintained, and children's artwork covered every available surface on the refrigerator and walls. It was warm and homey in a way his expensive penthouse had never been. "Welcome to our home," Emma announced proudly, taking charge as usual. "That's our couch and that's our TV and those are our books." She pointed to a small bookshelf overflowing with children's stories. "It's very nice," Richard said sincerely. And it was. Despite its modest size, it was clearly a home filled with love. Ethan stepped forward solemnly. "Mommy says you're our daddy." The simple statement nearly knocked Richard off his feet. He looked at Jasmine in surprise. "I told them this morning," she said quietly. "I thought it was better if they knew the truth." Richard crouched down to Ethan's eye level. "Yes, I am your daddy. I know this is confusing and you probably have a lot of questions." "Where have you been?" Emma asked with characteristic directness. It was the question Richard had been dreading. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that you didn't know they existed? How do you tell a child that their father had been absent not by choice, but by ignorance? "I didn't know about you," he said honestly. If I had known, I would have been here from the very beginning. Why didn't you know? Ethan pressed. Don't daddies always know about their children? Richard glanced at Jasmine, who was watching the interaction with careful eyes. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, he said finally. Sometimes they don't communicate the way they should. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of your lives if you'll let me. Eli, who had been silent until now, stepped closer. Are you going to live with us now? The question was so innocent, so hopeful, that Richard felt his chest tighten. I don't live here, he said gently. But I'd like to visit you and spend time with you if that's okay. Can you play games? Emma asked. Tommy's daddy plays games with him. I'd love to play games with you, Richard said. What kind of games do you like? For the next hour, Richard found himself immersed in the world of 4-year-olds. They showed him their toys, a collection of well-loved action figures, dolls, and books. They made him sit through a puppet show that Emma had clearly directed, with Ethan providing sound effects and Eli operating the puppets. He learned that Emma was the leader of the trio, always ready with ideas and opinions. Ethan was the thinker, carefully considering everything before he spoke. Eli was the gentle one, more sensitive than his siblings, quick to offer hugs and comfort. They were amazing children. Bright, funny, kind, and resilient. And they were his. Look what I drew. Emma announced, running to get a piece of paper from the kitchen counter. It was a crayon drawing of stick figures, a woman and 3 children. That's me, that's Ethan, that's Eli, and that's Mommy. Richard studied the drawing, noting the absence of a father figure. It's beautiful, he said. You're a very good artist. I can draw you too, Emma said excitedly. Do you want me to draw you? I would love that, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. As Emma ran to get her crayons, Jasmine approached. How are you doing? She asked quietly. They're incredible, Richard said, watching as Ethan showed Eli how to build a tower with blocks. They're so smart and funny and sweet. You've done an amazing job raising them. It hasn't always been easy, Jasmine admitted. But they're good kids. I can see that. Richard paused, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind all week. What happened, Jasmine? With the money from the divorce, I mean. You should have been set for years. Jasmine's expression tightened. When I found out I was pregnant with triplets, the doctor recommended bed rest for the last 3 months. I couldn't work. Then when they were born, Eli had complications. He was in the NICU for 6 weeks. The medical bills. She shrugged. Insurance covered some of it, but not all. And raising 3 children alone is expensive. Childcare, food, clothes, medical expenses. It adds up fast. Richard felt sick. While he had been building his fortune, his family had been struggling with medical bills and basic expenses. I should have been here, he said. I should have been helping. You didn't know, Jasmine said, but there was still hurt in her voice. And even if you had, would you have really been here? Or would you have just sent money and gone back to your 18-hour workdays? It was a fair question, and Richard wasn't sure he liked the answer. The man he had been 5 years ago probably would have done exactly that, written a check and assumed that solved the problem. I'm not that man anymore, he said. I know you don't believe me yet, but I'm not. Before Jasmine could respond, Emma returned with her drawing. She had added a tall stick figure to the family portrait, standing next to the woman figure. That's you, Daddy, she announced proudly. Now we're all together. Richard stared at the drawing, at the simple crayon representation of the family he had never known he wanted. The word, Daddy, from Emma's lips made his heart swell with an emotion he had never experienced before. Thank you, he managed to say. This is the most beautiful picture I've ever seen. You can keep it, Emma said generously. I'll make more. The hour passed too quickly. Before Richard knew it, Jasmine was glancing at the clock and giving him a meaningful look. I should go, he said reluctantly, standing up from where he'd been sitting on the floor with the children. Do you have to? Eli asked, his small face disappointed. The question broke Richard's heart. I'll come back soon, he promised. If your mommy says it's okay. All 3 children turned to look at Jasmine with pleading expressions. She looked at Richard for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in her mind. We'll see, she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Richard would take what he could get. As he prepared to leave, each child gave him a hug goodbye. Emma's was enthusiastic and brief. Ethan's was more reserved but genuine. Eli's lasted the longest, the little boy clinging to him like he was afraid Richard might disappear forever. Bye, Daddy, Eli whispered against Richard's shirt. Richard had to swallow hard to keep from breaking down completely. Bye, buddy. I'll see you soon. As he walked to his car, Richard could hear the children chattering excitedly inside the apartment. He sat in his car for several minutes, Emma's drawing carefully placed on the passenger seat, trying to process everything he was feeling. He was a father. Those 3 beautiful, amazing children were his. And for the first time in his life he understood what really mattered. Not money, not success, not building an empire. Family. Well, being there for the people who needed him. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. James, it's Richard Sterling. I need you to do something for me. I want to set up trust funds for 3 children. Full college tuition, medical expenses, everything they could ever need. And I want to do it anonymously through Jasmine's account so she doesn't know it's from me. Richard, what's going on? His lawyer asked, confused. I just found out I'm a father, Richard said, his voice full of wonder and determination. And I'm going to make sure my children never want for anything again. As he drove away from the apartment complex, Richard was already planning his next visit. He was going to win back his family one day at a time. Starting with proving to Jasmine that he really had changed. The man who had walked into that restaurant a week ago was gone forever. In his place was a father who would do anything for his children. That evening, Richard sat in his penthouse apartment, Emma's drawing carefully framed and placed on his mantel. The expensive art that had once decorated his walls seemed cold and meaningless now compared to the simple crayon masterpiece his daughter had created. He poured himself a glass of wine and settled into his leather chair, letting his mind drift back to the beginning. To when he and Jasmine had first met, when they had been young and in love and convinced they could conquer the world together. It had been 7 years ago at a charity gala for underprivileged children. Richard had been there for business reasons, networking, making the right connections, being seen at the right events. He had been 28, cocky and ambitious, already successful but hungry for more. Jasmine had been there as a volunteer, helping coordinate the silent auction. She had been 25, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in social work, passionate about helping others. When she had approached him about bidding on a weekend at a luxury resort, he had been struck speechless by her beauty and grace. Are you interested in the Colorado ski package? She had asked, her smile warm but professional. It's for a great cause. I'm interested in whatever you're selling, he had replied, the cheesy line slipping out before he could stop himself. Instead of rolling her eyes like most women would have, Jasmine had laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that had made his heart skip a beat. Well, I'm selling charity auction items, not myself, she had said with a grin. But I appreciate the confidence. They had talked for hours that night. She had told him about her work with at-risk youth, her dreams of opening her own counseling center someday. He had shared his vision for his tech company, his plans to revolutionize the industry. She had listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she understood not just what he did, but why it mattered to him. By the end of the evening, he had bid on 3 auction items he didn't need and had somehow convinced her to have dinner with him the following week. Their courtship had been like something out of a romantic movie. Richard had been completely smitten, more attentive and romantic than he had ever been with anyone. He had sent her flowers, taken her to incredible restaurants, whisked her away for weekend trips to places she had only dreamed of visiting. But more than that, he had listened to her. Really listened. He had supported her work, donated to the programs she cared about, even volunteered alongside her at the youth center where she worked. You're different than I expected, she had told him one evening as they walked through Central Park after dinner. What did you expect? He had asked, genuinely curious. I don't know. Someone more self-absorbed, I guess. Most successful men I've met only want to talk about themselves. But you ask questions. You care about what I think. He had stopped walking and pulled her into his arms right there on the path. Of course I care what you think. You're the most interesting person I've ever met. That had been the night he knew he was going to marry her. The proposal had come 6 months later, on the anniversary of the charity gala where they had met. He had arranged for the youth center where she worked to host a special event, and had gotten down on one knee in front of all the kids she mentored. Jasmine Williams, he had said, his voice shaking with emotion, you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me? She had said yes through tears of joy, and the kids had cheered so loudly that the neighbors had called to complain about the noise. Their wedding had been perfect, small and intimate, held in the garden of her childhood church. Jasmine had been radiant in a simple white dress that had cost more than most people made in a year, but she would have been beautiful in anything. Richard had cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, overwhelmed by how lucky he was. For the first year of their marriage, they had been blissfully happy. Richard had made an effort to balance work and home life. He had come home for dinner most nights, had taken real vacations with her, had made their relationship a priority. But slowly, insidiously, work had started taking over again. It had begun innocently enough. A major client had needed extra attention. A crucial deal had required late nights and weekend work. Each time, Richard had promised Jasmine it was temporary, that things would go back to normal once the crisis passed. But there was always another crisis. Another deal. Another opportunity that was too important to pass up. "I barely see you anymore," Jasmine had complained after he had missed their second wedding anniversary dinner for a last-minute business trip. "This is important, Jazz," he had said, already distracted by emails on his phone. "This deal could set us up for life." "We're already set up for life," she had pointed out. "When is enough going to be enough?" He had looked up from his phone, irritated by the interruption. "When I'm the biggest name in the industry. When I have enough market share to guarantee we'll never have to worry about anything. I'm not worried about money, Richard. I'm worried about us." But he hadn't listened. He had been so focused on building his empire that he hadn't noticed his marriage crumbling around him. The fights had gotten worse over the next 2 years. Jasmine had begged him to slow down, to remember what was really important. She had suggested couples counseling, weekend getaways, anything to reconnect. But Richard had always had an excuse. Always had something more pressing to deal with. "You knew who I was when you married me," he had said during one particularly heated argument. "You knew I was ambitious." "I married a man who cared about making a difference," Jasmine had shot back. "Not someone obsessed with making money." "The money lets us make a difference," he had argued. "The more successful I am, the more we can give back, the more we can help people." "When?" she had demanded. "When are we going to start helping people? When are we going to start that foundation we talked about? When are we going to volunteer together like we used to? You keep saying we'll do it later, but later never comes." She had been right, of course. All his talk about using his success to help others had been just that talk. He had been too busy chasing the next deal to actually do any good with the money he was making. The final straw had come on their 4th wedding anniversary. Richard had promised to take Jasmine to Paris, the trip they had been planning for months. But 3 days before they were supposed to leave, a major investor had called an emergency meeting. "You have to cancel," Susan, his assistant, had told him. "This could be the deal that makes you a billionaire." Richard had looked at the plane tickets on his desk, at the carefully planned itinerary Jasmine had put together. Then he had looked at the financial projections for the potential deal. "Cancel the trip," he had said. When he had gotten home that night, Jasmine had been sitting at the kitchen table with her suitcase beside her. Not the luggage for Paris, a single suitcase with her clothes. "I can't do this anymore," she had said quietly. "I feel like I'm married to your company, not to you. Jess, please. This deal." "There's always a deal," she had interrupted. "There's always something more important than us. I've been patient. I've been understanding. But I'm tired of coming second to your ambition." He had tried to argue, tried to convince her to stay. But she had already made up her mind. "I love you," she had said, tears streaming down her face. "I will always love you. But I can't live like this anymore. I can't be married to someone who doesn't have time for a marriage." She had left that night and Richard had let her go. He had told himself she would come back, that she just needed time to cool off. He had thrown himself even deeper into work, convincing himself that success would solve everything. The divorce papers had arrived 3 months later. Even then he hadn't fought for her. He had signed the papers, agreed to the generous settlement, and told himself he was better off alone. That he could focus on building his empire without distractions. What a fool he had been. Now, sitting in his empty apartment with his daughters drawing on the mantel, Richard finally understood what he had lost. Not just a wife but a partner. A best friend. The love of his life. And he had lost her because he had been too arrogant and stupid to see what really mattered. But he had lost more than that. He had lost 3 children who should have known their father from birth. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. He had missed thousands of bedtime stories and scraped knees and proud moments. All because he had chosen money over love. Success over family. Richard got up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, in a modest apartment across town, his children were probably getting ready for bed. Maybe Jasmine was reading them a story or helping them brush their teeth or listening to their prayers. All the things he should have been doing too. But it wasn't too late. He had found them now and he wasn't going to make the same mistakes again. He was going to fight for his family this time. He was going to prove to Jasmine that he had learned from his failures. He was going to win back the woman he had never stopped loving, and be the father his children deserved. The question was, would they give him the chance? The next morning, Jasmine stood at her kitchen counter packing 3 lunch boxes, the same routine she had followed every weekday for the past year. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into triangles, Emma's favorite shape. Apple slices with a little container of caramel dip for Ethan. Crackers and cheese for Eli, who was going through a phase where he would only eat foods that were square or rectangular. It was 6:30 a.m., and she had already been up for an hour, getting herself ready for another double shift at the restaurant while trying to prepare the kids for daycare. This was her life, an endless cycle of work, childcare, household chores, and trying to squeeze in a few precious moments with her children before exhaustion claimed her. "Mommy, I can't find my backpack." Emma called from the living room, her voice already showing signs of the morning panic that seemed to strike at least one of the triplets every day. "Check under the couch cushions," Jasmine called back, not looking up from the lunch boxes. "That's where you left it yesterday." "Found it?" Emma announced triumphantly. Jasmine smiled despite her tiredness. Emma's enthusiasm for life was infectious, even at this early hour. All 3 of her children had that quality and ability to find joy in small things that never failed to amaze her. It was one of the things that had kept her going through the hardest times. "Ethan, where are your shoes?" she called out, knowing without looking that her thoughtful middle son would be sitting on the floor somewhere, fully dressed except for his feet. "I'm putting them on," came the reply from the bathroom. "Eli, baby, breakfast is ready." Her youngest appeared in the doorway, his hair still messy from sleep, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. Eli was always the last to wake up fully, moving through the morning routine in a dreamy haze that reminded Jasmine of herself before her first cup of coffee. As she watched her children getting ready for the day, Jasmine's mind drifted back to yesterday's encounter with Richard. Seeing him again had stirred up so many emotions she had thought she had buried years ago. Anger, hurt, love, hope, all tangled together in a mess that made her chest feel tight. The kids had chattered about him all evening after he left, full of questions and excitement about their newfound father. It had been both heartwarming and heartbreaking to see their joy. They deserved to have a father in their lives, but Jasmine was terrified of letting them get too attached only to have Richard disappear again. She had learned not to count on anyone but herself. The early days after leaving Richard had been the hardest of her life. She had moved in with her sister temporarily, sleeping on a pull-out couch while dealing with morning sickness and the emotional devastation of her failed marriage. She had been too proud to ask Richard for help, too hurt by his apparent indifference to her departure. When she had found out she was having triplets, the news had been overwhelming. 3 babies. 3 college funds she would need to save for. 3 times the diapers, the sleepless nights, the everything. Her sister had been supportive but practical. "You need to tell Richard," she had said. "These are his children too. He has a right to know, and you're going to need help." So Jasmine had swallowed her pride and tried to reach out. The first call to Richard's office had been answered by Susan, his assistant. "Mr. Sterling is in meetings all day," Susan had said in her crisp, professional voice. "Can I take a message? This is his wife, his ex-wife. It's important. I'll let him know you called." But he never called back. She tried again a week later, then again. Each time Susan had some excuse. He was traveling. He was in meetings. He was dealing with a crisis. After the 4th call, Susan's tone had changed. "Mrs. Williams," she had said, using Jasmine's maiden name with deliberate emphasis, "Mr. Sterling has made it clear that he prefers not to be contacted about personal matters. Perhaps it would be best if you communicated through your lawyers if there are any issues with the divorce settlement." The message had been clear. Richard didn't want to hear from her. Whatever she had to say wasn't important enough to interrupt his precious business schedule. So she had given up trying to reach him and focused on preparing for motherhood alone. The pregnancy had been difficult. The doctor had recommended bed rest for the last trimester, which meant no income for 3 months. Her savings had dwindled quickly, and by the time the babies were born she was already struggling financially. Then Eli had complications during delivery. He had been born with underdeveloped lungs and had to spend 6 weeks in the NICU. The medical bills had been staggering even with insurance. Between the hospital costs and the loss of income, Jasmine had burned through the divorce settlement faster than she had ever imagined possible. The first year had been a blur of sleepless nights, crying babies, and mounting bills. She had tried to work from home doing freelance social work consultations, but it was nearly impossible to focus on anything with 3 infants who needed constant attention. When the kids turned 1, she had started looking for daycare so she could return to work full-time. But daycare for triplets was expensive, nearly as much as most people's rent. She had ended up taking a job at a diner that offered flexible hours, working nights while the kids slept and leaving them with a babysitter she could barely afford. It had been exhausting and lonely and scary. There were nights when she had lain awake wondering how she was going to make it through another day, let alone raise 3 children on her own. But she had done it. She had found strength she didn't know she possessed. She had learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, to stretch $1 further than should have been possible, to be everything her children needed even when she felt like she had nothing left to give. The kids had thrived despite their circumstances. They were happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. They were kind to each other and to others, bright and curious about the world around them. Jasmine was proud of the job she had done raising them, even if it hadn't been easy. "Mommy, are we going to see Daddy again today?" Emma asked as Jasmine helped her put on her jacket. The question made Jasmine's heart clench. "Not today, sweetheart. He has to work." "Will he come back soon?" Eli asked, his big eyes hopeful. "I don't know, baby. We'll have to wait and see." It was the same answer she had been giving them since yesterday, and she could see they were getting frustrated with the uncertainty. But Jasmine wasn't ready to make any promises. She had learned the hard way that promises could be broken, and she wouldn't put her children through that kind of disappointment. As she loaded the kids into her old car, the same one Richard had seen in the restaurant parking lot, Jasmine caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. She looked tired, older than her 30 years. The stress of single parenthood had taken its toll, adding lines around her eyes and gray threads to her hair. She had been beautiful once. Richard had told her so often during their marriage, had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Now she felt worn down by the constant struggle to keep her head above water. But her children didn't see her exhaustion. To them, she was their whole world, their protector, their provider, their constant source of love and comfort. They didn't know that she sometimes cried in the shower from sheer overwhelm, or that she lay awake at night worrying about money in the future. As far as they knew, everything was fine. And Jasmine intended to keep it that way. After dropping the kids at daycare, she drove to the restaurant for her morning shift. The lunch rush was always busy, and today was no exception. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders, serving food, refilling drinks, and forcing smiles even when her feet ached and her back was sore. During her break, she sat in the employee break room and allowed herself to think about Richard's visit. He had seemed different, somehow more serious, less arrogant than she remembered. The way he had looked at the children, with such wonder and love in his eyes, had stirred something in her heart that she had tried to keep buried. But she couldn't afford to be naive. People didn't change that much, especially not people like Richard who had built their entire identity around success and achievement. How long would it be before his initial enthusiasm wore off and he decided that being a father was too much work? Her phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her heart jumped, thinking it might be Richard. But it was just a reminder about Emma's parent-teacher conference next week. Another thing to worry about. Emma had been having some behavioral issues at preschool, nothing serious, but she was more aggressive than the other children, quicker to fight when she felt threatened. The teacher thought it might be related to not having a father figure in her life. Maybe having Richard around would help with that. Or maybe it would make things worse if he disappointed them. Jasmine rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. Everything felt so complicated now. For 5 years, it had just been her and the kids against the world. They had their routines, their little family unit that worked despite its imperfections. Now Richard was back and everything felt uncertain again. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The number wasn't familiar, but she answered anyway. "Hello? Ms. Williams? This is Jennifer from First National Bank. I'm calling because there's been some unusual activity on your account." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "What kind of activity?" "It appears a large deposit was made this morning. I wanted to verify that this was legitimate before processing it." "How large?" Jasmine asked, her heart starting to pound. $50,000. The deposit slip shows it's from a trust fund account, but there's no name listed as the depositor. Jasmine nearly dropped the phone. $50,000. It was more money than she had seen in one place since the divorce settlement. I don't know anything about this," she said. "There must be some mistake. The routing information is correct for your account. Someone definitely intended for this money to go to you. Would you like me to hold the deposit until you can investigate?" Jasmine's mind was racing. Who would deposit that much money into her account? And why? Then it hit her. Richard. It had to be Richard. "Yes," she said quickly. "Hold the deposit. I need to look into this." After hanging up, she sat staring at her phone, anger building in her chest. How dare he? How dare he think he could just throw money at the situation and make everything better? She didn't want his charity. She had been taking care of her children just fine without his help. The last thing she needed was for him to think he could buy his way back into their lives. But even as the anger burned in her chest, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered about all the things that money could do. Emma's speech therapy. New clothes for the kids. A better apartment. Maybe even the chance to cut back on her hours at the restaurant and spend more time with her children. No. She couldn't accept it. Accepting Richard's money would give him power over their lives, would make her dependent on him again. She had worked too hard for her independence to give it up now. But what if this wasn't about control? What if he genuinely wanted to help his children? Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She needed to talk to Richard to find out what he was thinking. But first she needed to finish her shift and pick up her kids. Everything else would have to wait. As she went back to work, serving tables and trying to focus on her customers, one thought kept running through her mind. Richard Sterling was back in her life, whether she wanted him there or not. And she had no idea what that meant for her or her children. Richard spent the entire week thinking about his visit with the children. He replayed every moment: Emma's enthusiastic chatter, Ethan's serious questions, Eli's shy smile. But most of all, he thought about the tired lines around Jasmine's eyes and the modest apartment where his children lived. That's why he had arranged for the money to be deposited into her account. Not as charity, but as child support he should have been paying all along. $50,000 was nothing compared to what he owed them for 5 years of absence. He should have expected her to call. His phone rang at exactly 2:17 p.m. on Wednesday. During a board meeting he immediately left to take in private. "Hello, Jasmine." "Don't you dare." "Hello, Jasmine, me," she said, her voice tight with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm trying to help my children," Richard said calmly, though his heart was racing. "That money should have been going to you all along." "I don't want your money. It's not about what you want. It's about what Emma, Ethan, and Eli need." There was silence on the other end of the line. Richard could practically hear her internal struggle. "You can't just throw money at this situation and think it fixes everything," she said finally. "I know that. But it's a start. Let me help, Jasmine. Please." Another long silence. Then, "The kids have been asking about you all week." Richard's heart jumped. "They have. Emma drew you another picture. Ethan asked if you know how to ride bikes. And Eli." Her voice softened. "Eli keeps asking when his daddy is coming back." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. His son, his baby boy, was asking for him. All 3 of his children were thinking about him, missing him. "Can I see them again?" he asked. "This weekend?" "I don't know if that's a good idea. They're getting attached too quickly." "Is that such a bad thing?" "It is if you're going to disappear again." "I'm not going anywhere," Richard said firmly. "I know you don't believe me yet, but I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago." "Prove it," Jasmine challenged. "Don't just tell me you've changed. Show me." "How?" "I don't know. But grand gestures and money aren't going to cut it. If you want to be part of their lives, part of our lives, you need to show up. Not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard too." "Tell me what you need," Richard said. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. "Emma has a parent-teacher conference on Friday at 3 p.m. She's been having some behavioral issues at school. I'll be there." "Richard, it's not going to be fun. She's been getting into fights with other kids. The teacher thinks it's because she doesn't have a father figure." The words stung, but Richard pushed through the guilt. "All the more reason for me to be there." "What school?" Jasmine gave him the address and details. "Don't make me regret this," she warned. "You won't," Richard promised. Friday afternoon found Richard sitting in a tiny plastic chair in Emma's preschool classroom, his knees practically touching his chin. Jasmine sat beside him in an equally uncomfortable chair, and across from them sat Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher. "Thank you both for coming," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice kind but concerned. "I wanted to talk to you about Emma's recent behavior." Richard glanced at Jasmine, who was sitting stiffly beside him. This was the first time they had been together as parents, and the weight of it felt enormous. "What kind of behavior?" Jasmine asked. "Emma is a bright, energetic child," Mrs. Peterson began diplomatically. "But she's been having trouble with impulse control. Yesterday she pushed another child off the swing because he wouldn't give her a turn. Last week she got into a shouting match with a classmate over who could use the red crayon." Richard felt his chest tighten with guilt. His daughter was acting out and it was his fault for not being there. "She's not aggressive at home," Jasmine said defensively. "She's actually very good at sharing with her brothers." "I believe that," Mrs. Peterson said. "But I think Emma might be feeling some anxiety about her family situation. Many of the other children talk about their fathers, and Emma gets upset when she doesn't have the same experiences to share. Richard couldn't stay quiet any longer. "That's my fault," he said. "I haven't been part of their lives until very recently." Mrs. Peterson looked at him with interest. "Are you Emma's father?" "Yes. And I know I have a lot of making up to do." "Well, that might explain some of Emma's recent behavior," the teacher said thoughtfully. "Change can be difficult for children, even positive change. Has Emma met you yet?" "Last Saturday," Richard said. "We spent an hour together." "And how did she react?" Richard smiled despite the seriousness of the conversation. "She drew me a picture and asked if I was really tall." Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "That sounds like Emma. She's very direct." Her expression grew more serious. "I think having you in her life could be very beneficial, but you'll need to be consistent. Children Emma's age need stability and routine. If you're going to be part of her life, it needs to be reliable." "I understand," Richard said. "I'm not going anywhere." They talked for another 20 minutes about strategies for helping Emma adjust, ways to support her emotional needs, and plans for keeping her teachers informed about the family changes. As they walked out of the school together, Jasmine was quiet. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. "I wasn't sure you would show up. I said I would be here. People say a lot of things." Richard stopped walking and turned to face her. "Jasmine, I know I gave you every reason not to trust me. But I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever Emma needs, whatever any of them need, I'm going to be there." Jasmine studied his face, searching for something. "The money you deposited," she said. "I had them hold it." "Why?" "Because I don't want charity. If you want to help support your children, then we need to do this properly. Child support, visitation schedules, legal documentation. I won't have you holding money over my head as leverage." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. We'll set up proper child support payments and work out a custody arrangement." "Custody?" Jasmine's voice was sharp with alarm. "Visitation," Richard corrected quickly. "I'm not trying to take them away from you, Jasmine. You're an amazing mother. I just want to be part of their lives." Some of the tension left her shoulders. "Okay. But we do this right, Richard. Legal agreements, clear boundaries, everything documented. Whatever you want." They had reached their cars, parked side by side in the school lot. Jasmine paused with her hand on her door handle. "There's something else," she said. "The kids want to know if you'll come to Eli's soccer game on Saturday." Richard's heart jumped. "He plays soccer?" "It's just a beginner league for 4-year-olds. More like organized chaos than actual soccer. But he's been talking about it all week, asking if his daddy will come watch him play." "Of course I'll be there." "What time?" 10 a.m. at Riverside Park. Field 3. Jasmine got into her car, then rolled down the window. "Don't disappoint him, Richard. He's the sensitive one. If you let him down, it'll break his heart." "I won't let him down," Richard promised. "Any of them." As he drove home, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with business or money. He was going to be at that soccer game. He was going to cheer for his son and be the father Eli deserved. For the first time since he had walked into that restaurant and seen his family, Richard felt like maybe, just maybe, he could earn his way back into their lives. But first he had a soccer game to prepare for. He had no idea what 4-year-old soccer looked like, but he was about to find out. That evening he went shopping for something he had never owned in his life: sports equipment. Not for himself, but for his children. Cleats, shin guards, water bottles with their names on them. He wanted to be prepared for anything. As he stood in the sporting goods store, surrounded by tiny soccer uniforms and child-sized equipment, Richard smiled. This was what mattered. Not board meetings or profit margins, but being there for the people he loved. He was finally learning what was truly important in life. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect weather for a 4-year-old soccer game. Jasmine arrived at Riverside Park 30 minutes early, as she always did, carrying a bag full of snacks, water bottles, and extra clothes in case one of the kids got dirty, which they always did. Emma and Ethan ran off to play on the playground with some of their friends from school, but Eli stayed close to his mother, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "Is Daddy really coming?" he asked for the 5th time that morning. "He said he would be here," Jasmine replied, trying to keep the uncertainty out of her voice. Despite Richard's promises, a part of her still expected him not to show up. Old habits died hard, and the Richard she had been married to had missed more important events than he had attended. But at 9:45 a.m., she spotted a familiar figure walking across the park. Richard was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, carrying what looked like a brand new soccer ball and a small cooler. Eli saw him at the same time. "Daddy," he shouted, dropping Jasmine's hand and running toward Richard as fast as his little legs could carry him. Richard's face lit up as he caught Eli in a bear hug, spinning him around before setting him down. "Hey buddy. Are you ready to play soccer? I got new cleats," Eli announced proudly, lifting one foot to show off his soccer shoes. "Mommy got them for me yesterday." "They're perfect," Richard said seriously, examining the cleats with the gravity of a professional scout. "These are definitely going to help you run fast." Jasmine watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Seeing Richard with Eli, seeing the pure joy on her son's face, made her heart swell. But it also made her nervous. What if this was just novelty for Richard? What if he got bored with playing father when the initial excitement wore off? "You came," Emma announced, running over from the playground with Ethan close behind. "Of course I came," Richard said, crouching down to their level. "I wouldn't miss Eli's game." "I don't play soccer," Emma informed him. "I play softball. My game is next week." "Then I'll come to your game too," Richard said without hesitation. "Really?" Emma's eyes lit up. "Really? And what about you, Ethan? Do you play any sports?" Ethan shook his head shyly. "I like to read books." "Reading is great too," Richard said. "Maybe you can tell me about your favorite book sometime." Jasmine felt her throat tighten as she watched Richard interact with their children. He was trying so hard, and they were responding to him with the easy acceptance that only children possessed. But she couldn't shake the worry that this was all temporary. "Jasmine," a voice called out behind her. She turned to see her sister Monica approaching with her own 2 children in tow. "I didn't know you were coming," Jasmine said, giving her sister a hug. "Sarah has a game on the next field," Monica explained, nodding toward her 6-year-old daughter. "I thought we'd stay and watch Eli play too." Her eyes shifted to where Richard was now helping Eli practice kicking the soccer ball. "Is that Richard?" Jasmine confirmed quietly. "The kid's father." Monica's expression immediately hardened. "What's he doing here?" "Being a father, apparently." "Jazz, you need to be careful," Monica said, lowering her voice so the children couldn't hear. "Men like him don't just show up after 5 years without an agenda." "I know," Jasmine said, but she found herself defending Richard despite her own doubts. "He seems different." "Different how?" "Rich men don't change, honey. They just get better at hiding their selfishness." Before Jasmine could respond, the coach was calling for the children to gather for the start of the game. Eli ran over to give both his parents a hug before joining his team on the field. "Go get him, buddy," Richard called out, and Eli beamed with pride. The game was exactly what Jasmine had warned Richard it would be: organized chaos. 24-year-olds chasing a ball around a field with varying degrees of success and attention spans. Some kids stopped to pick flowers. Others sat down in the middle of the field. One little boy spent the entire first quarter waving at his grandmother in the stands. But Eli was focused and determined, running back and forth across the field with serious concentration. When he finally managed to kick the ball toward the goal, even though it went wide, Richard jumped up from the sideline cheering like his son had just scored the winning goal in the World Cup. "That's my boy," he shouted, causing several other parents to smile at his enthusiasm. Jasmine found herself smiling too, despite her reservations. Richard's joy was infectious, and seeing him so proud of Eli warmed her heart. At halftime, Richard jogged over to where Eli was getting a drink of water. "You're doing great out there," he told his son. "I'm so proud of you." "Did you see me almost score?" Eli asked excitedly. "I saw it. That was an amazing kick." Monica leaned over to Jasmine. "He's good with them, I'll give him that. But Jazz, you need to think about what happens when the novelty wears off. What happens when he realizes that being a parent isn't all fun and games?" "I know," Jasmine said again, but with less conviction than before. The second half of the game was more of the same delightful chaos. Eli managed to kick the ball several more times, and even though his team lost 3-2, he was beaming when the game ended. "Did you see me play, Daddy?" he asked, running over to Richard with grass stains on his uniform and dirt on his face. "You were amazing," Richard said, lifting Eli up in another hug. "I'm so proud of you. Are you going to come to all my games?" Eli asked hopefully. Richard looked at Jasmine over Eli's head, silently asking for permission. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "If your mom says it's okay, then yes. I'll come to every game." Eli threw his arms around Richard's neck and squeezed tight. "I love you, Daddy." The simple words hit Richard like a lightning bolt. His son loved him. This beautiful, perfect little boy who barely knew him had just said he loved him. "I love you too, buddy," Richard managed to say around the lump in his throat. So much. As they packed up to leave, Richard helped carry the equipment while the children chattered excitedly about the game. Monica pulled Jasmine aside. I'm worried about you, she said bluntly. I see the way you're looking at him. You're falling for this act. It's not an act, Jasmine said, but even as she said it, she wondered if that was true. 5 years, Jas. 5 years he let you struggle alone. Now he shows up looking like Father of the Year, and you're ready to forgive everything. He didn't know about the kids, Jasmine protested. Because he didn't bother to find out. Because he was too busy building his empire to care about the woman he supposedly loved. Monica's words stung because they echoed Jasmine's own fears. I'm not forgetting what happened, she said. But these are his children too. They deserve to know their father. And what about you? Do you deserve to get your heart broken again? Before Jasmine could answer, Richard approached with the 3 children in tow. Thank you for letting me come today, he said to Jasmine. It meant everything to me. Thank you for being here, she replied and realized she meant it. Can we get ice cream? Emma asked hopefully. To celebrate Eli's game? Jasmine was about to say no, it was almost lunchtime, and ice cream would ruin their appetites, but Richard spoke first. That sounds like a great idea, he said. Is there a place nearby? There's a shop about 2 blocks from here, Jasmine said reluctantly. But, please mommy, all 3 children chorused. Looking at their eager faces, Jasmine felt her resolve crumble. Okay, but just small cones. The ice cream shop was crowded with families enjoying the beautiful Saturday afternoon. Richard insisted on paying for everyone's ice cream, and the children delighted in showing him their favorite flavors. As they sat at a picnic table outside the shop, watching the kids enjoy their treats, Jasmine found herself relaxing for the first time in months. This felt normal. Natural. Like they were actually a family. They're incredible kids, Richard said, watching as Emma helped Eli when his ice cream started to drip. They are, Jasmine agreed. Even when it's just been the 4 of us, they've always looked out for each other. You've done an amazing job with them. I know it couldn't have been easy. Jasmine glanced at him. Why now, Richard? Why are you suddenly interested in being a father? Richard was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Seeing them in that restaurant, it was like getting hit by lightning. I realized that I had been chasing success my whole life, but I had never actually achieved anything that mattered. Money, fame, business deals, none of that means anything compared to this. He gestured toward the children, who were now trying to share bites of each other's ice cream. I wasted 5 years, he continued. 5 years I could have been part of their lives. I can't get that time back, but I'm not going to waste another day. And what about me? The question slipped out before Jasmine could stop it. Richard's eyes met hers. What about you? Am I just collateral damage in your quest to be a good father? Or do you actually care about what this is doing to me? The honesty in her voice seemed to catch Richard off guard. Jasmine, because this is hard for me too, she continued. For 5 years it's been just me and them. I've made every decision, handled every crisis, been their whole world. Now you show up and suddenly I have to share them. I have to watch them fall in love with you and hope that you don't break their hearts. Richard set down his ice cream, his expression serious. I would never hurt them. You might not mean to. But what happens when being a father gets difficult? When they're sick and cranky, or when they have tantrums, or when they need you at inconvenient times? What happens when your business demands your attention again? That won't happen. How do you know? Jasmine challenged. How can you be so sure you've changed when you've never been tested? Richard didn't have an answer for that, and his silence spoke volumes. I need time, Jasmine said finally. The kids are getting attached to you so quickly and I'm scared. I'm scared of what happens if you leave again. I'm not going to leave. You left before. I was different then. Maybe. But I need more than words, Richard. I need proof that you're serious about this. That you're not going to get bored or overwhelmed and disappear again. Richard nodded slowly. What can I do to prove it to you? I don't know yet. But until I figure it out, we need to take things slow. Supervised visits, public places, planned activities. I won't have you disrupting their routine until I'm sure you're going to stick around. That's fair, Richard said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. And no more surprise deposits into my bank account. If you want to support your children, we'll work out proper child support through lawyers. Agreed. They finished their ice cream in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The children, oblivious to the tension, chattered happily about their plans for the rest of the weekend. As they prepared to leave, Richard crouched down to say goodbye to each child. When will we see you again? Ethan asked. Richard looked at Jasmine. When your mom says it's okay. Tomorrow? Emma asked hopefully. Not tomorrow, sweetheart, Jasmine said gently. Daddy needs to go to work. But we'll see each other soon, Richard promised. I'm not going anywhere. As they walked to their cars, Jasmine felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She was trying to protect her children, but was she also protecting herself? Was she being cautious or was she being cowardly? Jasmine, Richard said as she buckled the kids into their car seats. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm going to earn it. However long it takes. She looked at him, this man who had once been her whole world. He seemed sincere, but then he had seemed sincere before too. We'll see, she said finally. As she drove away, Jasmine caught sight of Richard in her rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot watching them leave. The image reminded her of another goodbye 5 years ago, when she had left him standing in their driveway as she drove away with her suitcase. The difference was, this time he looked like a man who had lost something precious. This time he looked like he cared. But caring wasn't enough. She had learned that the hard way. As the children chattered excitedly about their day with their father, Jasmine made a silent promise to herself. She would give Richard a chance to prove himself, but she wouldn't make it easy. Her children's hearts were too precious to risk on empty promises and good intentions. If Richard wanted to be part of their lives, he was going to have to earn it. Monday morning found Richard sitting in his lawyer's office, but for the first time in his career, he wasn't there to discuss business deals or acquisitions. Instead, he was there to legally acknowledge his children and establish proper child support. Are you sure about this amount? James Morrison, his attorney, asked, looking at the paperwork with raised eyebrows. This is significantly more than any court would require. I'm sure, Richard said firmly. I've missed 5 years of supporting my children. This is what they deserve. And the custody arrangement? Visitation only for now. Whatever schedule works best for their mother. I don't want to disrupt their lives any more than necessary. James leaned back in his chair, studying his longtime client. Richard, I have to ask, are you sure this woman isn't trying to take advantage of you? 3 children suddenly appearing, claiming you're the father. There's no doubt they're mine, Richard cut him off. You'd understand if you saw them. And Jasmine isn't trying to take advantage of anyone. If anything, she's been too independent for her own good. After leaving the lawyer's office, Richard made his next stop. His company's headquarters. He had been CEO and majority owner of Sterling Tech for 8 years, building it from a startup to a multi-million-dollar corporation. It had been his life's work, his greatest achievement. But now, looking up at the gleaming glass building with his name on it, Richard felt nothing but emptiness. What was the point of building an empire if you had no one to share it with? Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week, he told his assistant as he walked into his office. Sir? But you have the Peterson presentation on Wednesday, and the board meeting on Friday? Reschedule everything. I have more important things to do. His assistant looked confused but nodded. Richard had never canceled meetings before, never rearranged his schedule for anything that wasn't business-related. But that was the old Richard. The man who had lost his family because he couldn't see past the next quarterly report. Instead of staying at the office, Richard drove across town to the children's daycare center. He sat in his car across the street for an hour, just watching through the playground fence as his children played with their friends. Emma was clearly the leader of whatever game they were playing, directing the other children with the confidence of someone twice her age. Ethan sat quietly on a bench reading a book, occasionally looking up to make sure his siblings were okay. Eli was building something elaborate in the sandbox, his face serious with concentration. They were beautiful, perfect children, and they were his. The thought still felt surreal. His phone rang, interrupting his observations. The caller ID showed it was his business partner, David Chen. Richard, where are you? We were supposed to review the quarterly projections an hour ago. I'm busy, Richard said, not taking his eyes off the playground. Busy with what? The Peterson deal is worth $20 million. We can't afford to mess this up. Then you handle it. There was silence on the other end of the line. Are you feeling all right? You've been acting strange all week. I'm fine. Better than I've been in years, actually. Richard, whatever's going on, we need to talk about it. You can't just disappear from your own company. Richard finally looked away from the playground. You're right. We do need to talk. But not about quarterly projections. That afternoon, Richard called an emergency meeting with his board of directors and key investors. They gathered in the conference room with obvious concern, probably assuming he was about to announce some sort of crisis. I want to sell my majority stake in the company, Richard announced without preamble. The room erupted in shocked voices and urgent questions. "Richard, what's brought this on?" asked Margaret Walsh, his longtime business mentor. "I've recently learned that I have 3 children I never knew about," Richard said simply. "My priorities have changed." "But you can't just abandon the company," protested another board member. "Sterling Tech is your baby." "No," Richard said firmly. "My actual babies are Emma, Ethan, and Eli. They're 4 years old and I've already missed enough of their lives." The meeting lasted for 3 hours as lawyers and accountants were called in to discuss the logistics of Richard's decision. In the end, they agreed that he would sell his majority stake to his business partners while retaining a small percentage and a position on the board of directors. It would give him financial security for life while freeing him from the day-to-day responsibilities that had consumed his existence for so long. "I think you're making a mistake," David told him privately after the meeting. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment." "Maybe," Richard admitted. "But for the first time in my life, I'm making decisions with my heart instead of my head. And it feels right." Over the next few days, Richard threw himself into learning everything he could about being a father. He read parenting books, researched child development, and even signed up for a single-parent support group online. He learned about the importance of routine and consistency in children's lives. He read about how divorce and separation affected kids, and how to help them adjust to having a parent they barely knew. Most importantly, he learned that being a good father wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about showing up, being present, and putting his children's needs before his own. On Thursday evening he called Jasmine. "Hi," he said when she answered. "I wanted to let you know that I've set up the legal child support payments. The first one should go through tomorrow." "Thank you," Jasmine said, and he could hear the surprise in her voice. "I wasn't sure you'd follow through. I always follow through on my promises. I just haven't always made the right promises." There was a pause, then Jasmine said, "The kids have been asking about you." Richard's heart jumped. "They have. Emma wants to know if you like softball since her game is this weekend. Ethan asked if you know any good books he should read. And Eli." She paused. "Eli asked if you're going to be his daddy forever." The last one hit Richard like a physical blow. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that you want to be, but that grown-up relationships are complicated." "They don't have to be," Richard said quietly. "Not anymore." "Richard. I sold my company, Jasmine. Well, most of it. I'm stepping down as CEO." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You what?" she finally said. "I realized that I can't be the father they need if I'm working 80-hour weeks. So I changed my life. Completely." "Richard, you can't just throw away your career because of guilt. This isn't about guilt. It's about priorities. For the first time in my life, I know what really matters." "And what if you regret it? What if being a father isn't what you thought it would be? Then I'll deal with it. But I won't let fear of failure keep me from trying." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. "Emma's game is Saturday at 1 p.m., she said finally. "Riverside Park, Field 2. I'll be there." "Richard, don't make me regret trusting you." "You won't," he promised. "I'm not the same man who let you down before." After hanging up, Richard sat in his empty penthouse apartment, looking at the framed drawing Emma had made for him. In a few months he would probably sell this place too. It was too big, too cold, too much of a reminder of the life he had built without the people he loved. He wanted something smaller, warmer. Something that could become a home where his children would feel comfortable spending time. For the first time since his divorce, Richard was planning a future that included other people. A future where success was measured not in dollars or market share, but in bedtime stories read and soccer games attended and moments of pure, uncomplicated love. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely different from anything he had ever imagined for himself. But it felt right. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 2 weeks later, Richard had settled into a routine that would have been unimaginable to him just a month before. Instead of 18-hour workdays, he spent his mornings reading parenting books and his afternoons planning activities for his weekend visits with the children. He had attended Emma's softball game, where she had proudly introduced him to her teammates as "my daddy." He had taken Ethan to the library and discovered his son's love for books about dinosaurs and space. He had cheered at another one of Eli's soccer games and taught him how to tie his shoes properly. Slowly, carefully, he was building relationships with his children. And even more slowly, he was earning back Jasmine's trust. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm of communication, texting about the children's activities and needs, speaking on the phone about school events and medical appointments. It wasn't the easy intimacy they had once shared, but it was progress. Richard was at his apartment on a Tuesday evening, reviewing the custody agreement his lawyer had drawn up, when his phone rang. Jasmine's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. She rarely called in the evenings unless something was wrong. "Hi," he said, answering on the first ring. "Is everything okay?" "It's Eli." Jasmine's voice was tight with worry. "He's in the emergency room." Richard's blood ran cold. "What happened?" "He had trouble breathing during dinner. I thought it was just his asthma, but his inhaler didn't help. He couldn't catch his breath and his lips started turning blue." Richard was already reaching for his keys. "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's." "Richard, I'm scared. He looks so small in that hospital bed." "I'm on my way." 20 minutes. Richard broke several speed limits getting to the hospital. He found Jasmine in the pediatric emergency waiting room, still in her work uniform, her face pale with worry. "Any news?" he asked, pulling her into a hug without thinking about it. For a moment, she leaned into him, accepting the comfort he offered. "They're running tests. The doctor thinks it might be pneumonia, but they want to be sure." "Where are Emma and Ethan?" "My sister picked them up. I didn't want them to see Eli like this." Richard nodded, understanding. "Can I see him?" "He's been asking for you," Jasmine admitted. The nurse said one more person could go back. They walked through the maze of hospital corridors to the pediatric ward. Eli lay in a hospital bed that looked enormous compared to his small frame, oxygen tubes in his nose and monitors beeping softly around him. But his face lit up when he saw Richard walk in. "Daddy," he said, his voice raspy but excited. "I'm in the hospital like a real grown-up." Richard's heart clenched at seeing his son looking so fragile, but he managed to smile. "Hey buddy. How are you feeling?" "My chest hurts, but the doctor says I'm going to be okay." "And look." Eli held up his arm to show off the hospital bracelet. "I have a special bracelet with my name on it." "That's pretty cool," Richard said, sitting down in the chair next to the bed. "Are you scared?" Eli considered this seriously. "A little bit. But Mommy's here and now you're here too, so I'm okay." The simple trust in his son's voice nearly undid Richard completely. This little boy, who had known him for less than a month, already counted on him to make things better. "I'm not going anywhere," Richard promised, taking Eli's small hand in his. A doctor appeared in the doorway, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a reassuring manner. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling?" she said, looking between Richard and Jasmine. "We're divorced," Jasmine corrected quietly. "But he's Eli's father." "I'm Dr. Martinez. I have good news, it's pneumonia, but it's not severe. We caught it early. Eli will need to stay overnight for observation and to start him on 4 antibiotics, but he should be fine to go home tomorrow afternoon." Relief flooded through Richard so powerfully that he had to grip the arm of his chair to stay upright. "However," Dr. Martinez continued, "I am concerned about his asthma management. This episode was triggered by a respiratory infection, which suggests his asthma might not be as well controlled as it could be. I'd like to refer you to a pediatric pulmonologist for a more comprehensive treatment plan." Jasmine's face fell. Our insurance doesn't cover specialists very well. And with the deductible." "Don't worry about the cost," Richard said immediately. "Whatever he needs." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "Good. I'll have my office set up the referral. In the meantime, Eli needs rest. Visiting hours end at 9, but we can make an exception for parents to stay overnight." After the doctor left, Richard and Jasmine sat in silence, watching Eli doze fitfully in his hospital bed. "I should have seen the signs earlier," Jasmine said quietly, guilt heavy in her voice. "He'd been coughing for a few days, but I thought it was just a cold." "You did everything right," Richard assured her. "You got him here in time. But the specialist visits, the better medications, I've been putting off upgrading his asthma care because of the cost." "What kind of mother does that make me?" "The kind who's been doing her best alone for 5 years," Richard said firmly. "But you're not alone anymore." Jasmine looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Richard, I can't let you pay for everything. It's too much. He's my son too. And I have 5 years of medical bills to make up for." They settled into an uncomfortable routine for the long night ahead. The hospital provided a cot for Jasmine, but Richard insisted on taking the chair so she could get some rest. Every few hours, a nurse would come in to check Eli's vital signs and adjust his medications. Around 3 a.m. Eli woke up crying from a bad dream. "Mommy," he called out, his voice small and scared. Jasmine was by his side in an instant. "I'm here, baby. What's wrong?" I dreamed that the machines were going to take me away from you and Daddy. That's not going to happen, Jasmine soothed, stroking his hair. We're both right here and we're not going anywhere. Promise? Eli asked, looking at Richard. I promise, Richard said without hesitation. Nothing is going to take you away from us. As Jasmine got Eli settled back to sleep, Richard marveled at how naturally she handled the crisis. She was calm, reassuring, and completely focused on their son's needs. She was an incredible mother, and he felt a surge of admiration for the woman who had raised his children so well. You're amazing with him, he said quietly when Eli had drifted back to sleep. I've had practice, Jasmine replied, but there was no bitterness in her voice. Just exhaustion. Get some rest. I'll watch him. Richard, you don't have to stay. You probably have work tomorrow. There is nowhere else I would rather be than right here with my family, Richard said firmly. The word family hung in the air between them. Jasmine studied his face in the dim light from the hallway. You really have changed, haven't you? She said softly. I told you I had. I know. I had to see it for myself. They took turns dozing in the chair while the other kept watch over Eli. When morning came, Richard realized he had spent more consecutive hours with Jasmine than he had since their divorce. And despite the circumstances, it had felt right. Natural. Like they were a team again. Dr. Martinez returned in the morning with good news. Eli's breathing had improved significantly overnight, and he was responding well to the antibiotics. He can go home this afternoon, she announced. But I want him to rest for the rest of the week. No school, no strenuous activities. I'll take time off work, Jasmine said immediately. Actually, Richard interjected, I could stay with him. If that's okay with you. Jasmine looked surprised. You'd do that? Of course. You can't afford to miss work and I'm between jobs right now. It wasn't entirely true, he still had board meetings and consulting work to do, but none of that seemed important compared to taking care of his son. I don't know, Jasmine said uncertainly. He'll need his medications on schedule, and he gets cranky when he doesn't feel well. Then teach me, Richard said simply. Show me what he needs. After a moment's hesitation, Jasmine nodded. Okay. But I'm calling to check on him every hour. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. As they prepared to take Eli home, Richard realized that something fundamental had shifted between him and Jasmine during their long night at the hospital. They had faced a crisis together, had been partners in caring for their child. For the first time since he had walked back into their lives, they had felt like a real family. 6 months later, Richard stood in front of the mirror in his new apartment, adjusting his tie for the third time. His hands were shaking not from nerves about the important business meeting he wasn't attending, but because today was the day he planned to ask Jasmine to marry him again. The apartment was smaller than his penthouse had been, but it was warm and welcoming. The refrigerator was covered with the children's artwork, family photos lined the mantel, and toys were scattered in every corner. It had become a second home for Emma, Ethan, and Eli, who now spent every weekend with him and 2 evenings during the week. The past 6 months had been the best of Richard's life. He had kept his promise to be present for his children, attending every game, every school event, every doctor's appointment. When Eli had another asthma attack in February, Richard had been the one to rush him to the hospital while Jasmine was at work. When Emma had gotten into trouble at school for fighting, Richard had been the one to sit with her and talk through her emotions. He had learned that being a parent meant sleepless nights when someone had a fever, endless patience for the same bedtime story read 50 times, and the kind of bone-deep love that made everything else in life seem secondary. But more than that, he had slowly, carefully earned back Jasmine's trust. It had started small, arriving exactly when he said he would, following through on every promise, proving that his children's needs would always come first. Then it had grown into longer conversations, shared jokes, comfortable silences. 3 months ago, Jasmine had started inviting him to stay for dinner after his visits with the children. 2 months ago, she had called him when her car broke down, asking if he could pick up the kids from school. Last month, she had fallen asleep on his couch while they watched a movie together, and he had covered her with a blanket and let himself out quietly, his heart full of hope. They hadn't talked about their relationship directly, but Richard could feel the walls Jasmine had built around her heart slowly coming down. Now he was ready to take the biggest risk of his life. The ring box in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It wasn't an elaborate proposal he had planned, no flash mobs or billboards or grand romantic gestures. He had learned that Jasmine didn't need those things. She needed consistency, honesty, and proof that he would choose her and their children over everything else. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Running a few minutes late. Kids are already at mom's for the night. See you soon. Today was supposed to be their first official date in over 5 years. Richard had asked Jasmine to dinner, just the two of them, and after some hesitation she had said yes. He had reservations at a quiet restaurant across town, not too fancy, not too casual. Somewhere they could talk without interruption, where he could tell her everything he had been holding in his heart for months. When Jasmine arrived at his apartment, Richard's breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked happy. "Hi," she said, suddenly seeming shy. "Hi yourself," Richard replied, drinking in the sight of her. "You look incredible." "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." They drove to the restaurant, making small talk about the children's activities and Richard's latest consulting project. But underneath the casual conversation, there was an electric tension, an awareness that this evening meant something important. The restaurant was perfect, intimate but not stuffy, with soft lighting and a corner table that gave them privacy. They ordered wine and fell into the easy conversation that had become natural to them over the past months. "Emma got an A on her science project," Jasmine told him. "She wanted me to call and tell you as soon as she got home from school." "She worked so hard on that volcano," Richard said, smiling at the memory of their kitchen covered in baking soda and food coloring. "I'm so proud of her." "She's proud that you helped her. She tells everyone at school about her daddy who helps with her homework." The word, daddy, still made Richard's heart skip a beat. He would never get tired of hearing it. "And how's Eli doing with the new medication?" "Much better. No episodes since we switched to the new inhaler. The pediatric pulmonologist says his asthma is finally well controlled." They talked about Ethan's latest book recommendations, Emma's upcoming softball tournament, and Eli's progress in soccer. To anyone watching, they would have looked like any married couple discussing their children's lives. But they weren't married. And that was what Richard wanted to change. "Jasmine," he said as they finished their main course, "there's something I want to talk to you about." She looked up from her plate, something in his tone making her suddenly alert. "What is it?" Richard took a deep breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "These past 6 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know our children, spending time with you, being part of your family, it's made me realize what I lost when I let you go." Jasmine set down her fork, her expression guarded. "Richard, please let me finish." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know I hurt you in ways that might never fully heal. But I love you, Jasmine. I never stopped loving you. And I want to try again." Tears gathered in Jasmine's eyes. "We tried once before. Look how that ended. I'm not the same man I was then. You've seen that, haven't you? I put Emma, Ethan, and Eli first in everything I do. But I want to put you first too. I want to be the husband you deserved the first time around." "Richard, this is too fast. We've barely started dating again." "I know it's fast. But I also know that I don't want to waste another day. I don't want to miss another moment with you and our children." Richard slid out of his chair and got down on one knee right there in the restaurant, pulling out the ring box. Several other diners turned to look, but Richard only had eyes for Jasmine. "Jasmine Williams," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Will you give me another chance to be the husband you deserve? Will you marry me again?" Jasmine stared at the ring, a simple, elegant solitaire, nothing like the elaborate diamond he had given her the first time. This ring was about love, not showing off wealth. "Richard, She looked around the restaurant, aware that people were watching, then back at him. "Get up. People are staring." "I don't care if the whole world is staring. I only care about your answer." Tears were streaming down Jasmine's face now. "You broke my heart once. How do I know you won't do it again?" "Because I'd rather die than live without you and our children. Because I've learned what really matters in life. Because I'm not afraid of love any more, I'm afraid of losing it." Jasmine looked at the ring, then at Richard's face, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes. "The children," she said finally. "We'd have to tell them together. They'd have to be okay with this." "Does that mean yes?" Jasmine wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "That means yes, you stubborn romantic fool. Yes, I'll marry you again." The restaurant erupted in applause as Richard slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her properly for the first time in over 5 years. It was a kiss full of love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. 3 months later, they had a small wedding in the same church garden where they had been married the first time. Emma, Ethan, and Eli served as their wedding party, beaming with pride as their parents promised to love each other forever. This time Richard meant every word of his vows. This time he understood that success wasn't measured in dollars or achievements, but in the love of the people who mattered most. As they danced to their wedding song, the same one they had chosen 7 years earlier, Jasmine looked up at her husband with eyes full of joy. "No regrets?" she asked softly. "Only that it took me so long to find my way back to you," Richard replied, spinning her around as their children giggled and clapped nearby. They had lost 5 years, but they had the rest of their lives to make up for it. And this time Richard Sterling knew exactly what his priorities were. Family. Well, being present for the moments that mattered. Everything else was just noise.